I was raised in Cambria County, PA, and in the 1970s and 80s, I heard these super hard wood hits in the dense forest around my hometown, maybe 3 or 4 times, 50 to 100 yards from me. I moved to Florida in 81, but would visit in the summers. I didn't know what that sound was then, but I seriously wondered about how the heck it was produced. It would take a superhuman to make that hard of a whack, I heard. I wondered about it for years. One guy I was with actually went to the insane asylum because he just couldn't handle the fact of what we saw. I also had this happen in a car dealership with 12 other salespeople, and we saw clearly a UFO, and they went crazy the next day. Many of them just refusing to talk about it or making up some absurd excuse. In the first instance, the guy who went in the insane asylum, it was a Bigfoot, and it just screamed at us. My dad built a house in Vermont about 35 years ago. My wife and I were sleeping in the basement. I had a dream the house was built on an Indian burial ground. I woke up to my 3-year-old Rottweiler having a seizure. Every now and again, when I'm outside by myself, I hear that big wood on wood banging sound that we've all heard in the woods. I used to say that if you spend a few hours at night staring into space, you'd see things you can't explain. Last fall, I did this for 2 weeks straight, seeing nothing. The last night, before it got too cold, I saw a bright flash, like an old flash bulb, straight overhead. Staring at the same spot, 25 seconds later, the same flash in the same place. No lateral movement. This was my 2-week quest for something I can't explain. Had a Bigfoot come into my camp. Didn't see it, but found his track the next morning. Also had something that was a gargoyle or some type of winged creature make an appearance. In 1978, southern Indiana, along Pigeon Creek that runs to the Ohio River, we encountered a Sasquatch. Years ago, Washington State, I was about 10, so like 1984. Possibly a thunderbird flying over Sioux Falls, South Dakota. 1 Bigfoot sighting in Michigan, 2, possibly 3 Bigfoot sightings in Ohio. Oh, and 2 big cats, panthers, in Ohio, and 1 ghost hitchhiker sighting twice in the same spot. I live behind a haunted school. During the middle of the night, I can hear the school bell ringing. It feels like a full day of class goes on some nights. It was Christmas Day, and I was 9. We drove to my grandparents' house. My grandparents lived in a community which wasn't gated, but still required you to drive through an entrance of the community, then turn right, drive down 2 blocks of houses, then turn left to get to their house. We just turned right. We drove past a house that still had their Halloween decorations up. I pointed this out to my mom, and she told me not to look at that house anymore and to look straight ahead until we arrived at my grandparents' house. Later on, I realized that the Halloween decoration of a life-size man in a suit hanging by a rope from the tree in the front yard was no decoration. I will preface this by saying I'm not a spiritual person. I do not believe in an afterlife or past lives or souls or anything. This experience, however, was weirdly vivid, and I still think about it, despite happening years ago. I had a dream some time ago where I died. I don't remember how, but that's not part that stood out to me. I ended up in this purgatory waiting room type place. Think of a dentist's office. There was a lot of white. I remember one of the receptionists trying to sort me into heaven or hell, but I kept trying to tell her that it was some kind of mistake and I shouldn't be there. I explained that I couldn't be dead because my mother, who was going back to school at the time, would miss me, and all her efforts to improve our life would have been for nothing. She sent me away to try to cope. I don't remember much of the middle then, but I do remember before I woke up from the dream, the same receptionist lady placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't let your mother's hard work go to waste." I woke up immediately after that. Like I said, not a spiritual person, but if I die, wake up in a dentist's office, I would not be surprised. I awoke one evening back in 2015. I remember waking up really thirsty and going for a drink of water in the kitchen. I kept thinking, daggum, for some reason. Like, get the daggum cup, pour the daggum water. Which is weird because I don't say that ever. So anyways, fast forward to the next morning, I get up and drive across town to meet my father-in-law to help him move a refrigerator. And on my way, I drove through the scene of a bad car motorcycle accident. The rider on the motorcycle was on the ground of his stomach as I passed by. My blood ran cold when I saw the little license plate on his bike that read, daggum, chills, WTF. I get night terrors sometimes or sleep paralysis, usually before I get up, right after I fall asleep. But I haven't gotten that deep sleep yet, so it still feels like I'm mildly aware of my surroundings. It doesn't last long, but it's that in-between feeling. Sometimes when people talk to me when I'm in that half-slept phase, I respond. I always respond with plural pronouns. We're almost up, or we're still in bed, that sort of thing. When people then ask me why I'm using pronouns, I'll say something like, we're all together, or my friends are all here. It's definitely weird at summer camp when I was a kid or in college dorms. But it's one of those things that's weird that becomes pretty normal and easy to forget. Early on in college, while I was probably taking too many classes, I had started regularly taking these 20-minute naps in between studying. Not sure if I ever actually slept, but it was nice to have a few minutes to not study. When I did this, though, I would end up in that quasi-sleep state, and I'd start to see people, or figures maybe, right at the edge of my peripheral. They looked like people I knew, but their faces were always a little bit blurry, or very severe looking, like they had been awake for a few days straight. The creepy thing, though, is they'd always start in my peripheral and then begin to loom closer. Now, I knew about sleep paralysis at the time, so I figured it was creepy. Just something weird my brain was doing, and I didn't think much of it. Well, at least until the next time I was home. I told my dad about my half-weird dreams. He got very quiet and told me he got them too, almost every night, if he didn't go right to sleep. It's been a few years now, since college. I noticed that this doesn't happen much if I'm sharing a bed. I mostly try to ignore it, but I definitely drink a bit more coffee and avoid naps. Was in the Alps with some university pals to do some field work for a botany exam. We were staying in a refuge in the middle of nowhere at 1,400 meters of altitude and 40-minute drive away from the nearest town, which was literally composed of 20 houses, the smallest supermarket ever, and a pharmacy. Anyway, we had an area of 15 kilometer by 15 kilometer to work, in which was a good distance from the refuge in the middle of the woods. We were walking in the woods when out of nowhere we found ourselves in front of a house, which was clearly inhabited, smoke coming out of the chimney, clothes hung out to dry outside. But it wasn't on the map we had. The map was really well made and included even the smallest and most in ruins buildings to avoid people getting lost in the woods. We thought it was weird that this house wasn't on our map, but we kept walking towards it because we had an exam to pass. As we approached the house, we noticed a doll's head on a spike in front lawn. We got really creeped out. Took a picture to show the refuge owner. Quickly noped the F out of there. Turns out the refuge owner, who knew the area really well, didn't even know there was a house there. Creepy crap. Was a security coordinator for a large electric company and had access to like 80 plus facilities, CCTV, infrastructures. I was doing maintenance check on some random train station at like 3 a.m. Panned a camera as far to the right as possible to check that it was functioning, and this dude was on all fours eating a deer in the middle of the tracks. Watched him for like 10 minutes and went to get the other guy on shift. When I came back, the dude was gone. Rewound it, and the dude stopped munching on the carcass, wiped the gore off his face, and walked into the woods like he didn't have a care in the world. My wife had a miscarriage at 20 weeks. It was a girl, and we were going to name her Samantha. A couple days later, My wife hears our 2-year-old talking in her room in the middle of the night. She goes up and asks her what she's doing, and she tells my wife, "I'm talking to Samantha. She's on the ceiling." I went to Argentina a few years ago to see my mom's side of the family. I had tons of fun in Argentina, except for when I had to go to sleep at night. The guest room was right next to the storage room, which had this strange, creepy doll that my mom got as a kid. I knew something was off about it. Fast forward to about 2:30 a.m. and I hear this loud thump in the storage room. Another thump follows. This threw me and my mom awake, and we went to see what was going on. The doll somehow got out of the chair and hit the door. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I used to live in Japan, and there was a field that was known to be haunted by children. From what I was told, some kids died there during World War II, and they come back at night to play. Nothing malevolent or anything is supposed to happen. One night we decided to investigate the situation. It was during the summer, and it was quite warm outside, except for the area of the playground. There was quite noticeable difference between the temperature in the park and opposed to everywhere else. We also heard equipment moving. The air was quite still, and there's movement in areas where nobody was. There have been accounts of the police being dispatched to the area from people seeing kids playing there and loud children having fun in the middle of the night. Through college and a few years after, I had sleep paralysis very often. It was never the same hallucination. The first experience was Samara from The Ring hanging over me and dripping water onto me. I woke up drenched in sweat. I've also seen the shadows of people on my wall while they spoke nonsense from the foot of my bed, seemingly with ill intent, but I couldn't understand them. Most of the time it was too dark for me to see, so I would just have the feeling of something pressing down on me, forcing me into the mattress, and usually accompanied by exaggerated house sounds or the sounds of nature outside my window was open. Usually whenever I have them, they appear in the corner of my room. They're tall and possibly thin, with large and long hands, all pitch shadows with red circles where eyes would be. They sort of resemble people. They usually just come up and sit on the edge of my bed, pat my knee gently as to comfort me. They aren't mean or anything. They go between looking at me or just looking at things in my room, reading posters, etc. Eventually, they sort of just dissolve into thin air, and then they're gone. It's a weird experience, but I'm glad it's not deeply horrifying. Mine would kneel at the edge of my bed and mumble in a comforting manner. I never felt threatened, but definitely a strange experience. My first time was a figure in a motorcycle helmet standing in the doorway of my room. My first time living away from home on my own. It feels like your mouth is sewn shut and your tongue isn't there, even if you wanted to scream. Your body is just stapled to the bed or in some thick substance that doesn't let you move. I get it less and less often as I get older. I think messing around with drugs caused it. Now when I get it, I can alter my breathing enough for my boyfriend wakes up and then can wake me up. It's bloody horrible though. Before I was diagnosed with narcolepsy and found out about sleep paralysis, I thought I had ghost encounters with touching and telekinetic stuff and everything. This new information made sense in my life again. I used to have them when I was younger. I would always wake up and 3 blobbish black masses would be at the foot of my bed. No faces, but blackened, more so than their bodies. It's sunken in where their face would have been. No sharp lines or distinct features, just 3 separate blobs, floor about 6 feet long. Couldn't move, felt like I couldn't breathe. I would just have to lay there until they dissipated. They weren't violent, but felt malevolent. Felt like hours until they left, but I had no sense of how much time would pass. I would like to note that my mother made me collect dolls growing up and would put them in my room. I wholeheartedly believe those keep the dead inside, but that's just my opinion. There's frequently an auditory component to my sleep paralysis. I intuitively know they are on the other side of my bedroom door, soon to enter. The auditory part consists of the times when I can hear. This is a bit more dreamlike sensation. Savage knocking and rattling. That part is pure effing torture. I've had sleep paralysis like twice. I've never had any visual hallucinations though, just auditory hallucinations. Both times it was deafening sound of television or radio static. One of the times freaked me out because I had my radio on, so I thought that something was just messing with it. Tried to get up to see what was going on and realized I couldn't move. Luckily I was familiar with sleep paralysis and was able to wake myself up. You know, when I was younger, and still a little bit now, I believed that having sleep paralysis was halfway crossing over to another world or dimension, and the demons that would visit me knew I was a little lost, and their appearance might be a little jarring to me, as I was little. Maybe the habit of just being non-threatening and gentle never went away as I got older. I do recall one. I managed to let out this little scared whine, and I swore. The demon shushed me and gently patted my head. Regardless whether or not sleep paralysis demons are real, they certainly feel real. So weird. Also good to know I'm not the only one who has harmless sleep demons. I have a strange demon. He's like 50 years old, is bald somewhat, has a very satanic face with a beard. He grabs me from my back and squeezes me too much that I scream and scream until my mom or brother comes to my room to wake me up. This doesn't happen when I'm sleeping straight or on the left side, but happens when I'm sleeping on the right. It means even without any weight on my body, I feel him. It's been about 4 months since I last saw him. I'm poor at drawing, but I've seen him so much that I can describe his facial features. I've made a sketch. I can't draw the grin that he has on his face, but I can somewhat reimagine it. My mom told me whenever she comes to wake me up and I'm screaming in my dream, I make scream much different than when I'm awake. I grew up in a college town in Kansas, and this happened while I was in college there. A high school buddy of mine was hit and killed by a train. People used to get drunk and go play on the tracks outside of town at night. Do stupid crap like see how close they could cut it with oncoming train before jumping off the tracks. My friend cut it too close. This was October in 1985, and the Kansas City Royals were in the World Series. After my friend's funeral, a bunch of our high school friends who were friends with him decided to get together and watch one of the series games on TV together. As we're watching the game, it goes to commercial. One of the commercials is interrupted midway through by an Amtrak spot with a music score that has a guy singing, "There's something about a train." We all just kind of stop and look at each other, wondering if we're all thinking the same thing. Flash forward to March the following year. I'm in Daytona Beach for spring break. I'm in a hotel room with a bunch of people partying. There's music playing and the TV is on. We're all just drinking beer and laughing and chatting about weird things that have happened to us. I recount the story. I'm telling the story saying I hadn't seen the Amtrak commercial before or since the World Series game. The commercial comes on TV. When I was young, I lost a tooth at my grandma's house, so naturally I put it under my pillow. I was sleeping in my grandpa's room, which was separate from my grandma's. I stayed up all night waiting for the tooth fairy. Eventually the door opened, but it wasn't the tooth fairy. It was my grandpa. My grandpa died 3 years before this. He came into the room, seemed not to notice me, sat down at his desk, and began working on something. I didn't realize how strange this was until years later. I moved in with a friend temporarily. During the day while he was at work, doors on the second floor kept opening and closing. We were working on a computer, and I told him what was happening. I asked how long it had been going on. He poo-pooed me and said, "There are no ghosts here," just as the pictures came crashing off the walls. 10 years ago, I went to the Montparnasse Cemetery in Paris to see Baudelaire's grave with my mom and my friend. I decided to take a walk alone in the path near the street and admire the architecture. 20 minutes later, I was calling my friend and told him that I would go back to our car and wait on them there. As I was just saying that, a woman dressed in all black walked on the path in the opposite direction, pushing a loud cart. I stand up still, continued my phone call, but then she literally disappeared behind a goddamn grave while casually walking. Blinked 10 times and and run out of the cemetery like Forrest Gump. I still don't know what I saw. She looked extremely old. Her back was literally bending in half on her cart, or whatever the hell that thing was. That's why I was watching her carefully in the first place. Such a trauma. I'm convinced my first apartment was haunted by a little boy. Lying in bed at night, something was gently pinching my big toe. Enough to wake me up, and I could still feel it, but I was too scared to look down at what it could be. After a few times of this, I even whispered, "Please let me go," and the feeling slowly left my foot. It happened a few more times before I told my husband. He told me to wake him next time it happens. So a few nights later, I feel the hand holding my toe, so I nudge my husband and say, "Hey babe." He says, "Do you feel it?" I said, "Yes." He whispers back, "Okay, 'cause I feel him too." I didn't see it firsthand, don't know if it's fake or real. This guy in the UK, Michael D. McGee, or something, says he's been haunted for a year, no matter how many times he moves. He had this one video while he was sleeping. You see this dark shadow move into his room, and it seems like it could be looking at him. You clearly hear this goosebump-inducing growl. He also hears and scares the F out of him. He decided to sleep on the couch the rest of the night. Driving up through the mountains on a remote road, just me and my husband, nighttime in the fall, no houses or businesses for miles, around a bendy section on a steep side of the mountain. The words "slow down" are written across the road for safety reasons in giant white letters. We have Billy Joel playing on satellite radio. As we approach the words on the ground, a man's deep voice comes through the radio saying, "Slow down." And it is not Billy Joel. The words "slow down" were not in that song. Me and my husband look at each other and we were equally freaked the hell out. We have passed these words hundreds of times before, and since, that was the only time it ever happened. But ever since then, as we drive over the words, one of us will imitate that voice, and we both crack up laughing. When I was around 3, every night this thing would enter my room by the window. It wasn't really human, kind of bell-shaped, but with arms and legs and glowing red eyes. The thing would approach my bed, creeping closer every night for weeks. The last night I saw it, it was beside my head, reaching out to touch me. I buried my head in the blankets as it reached out. I don't think it touched me, and it never came back. I still hate glowing red eyes because of that thing. Looking at the mirror in the dark still gives me some creeps. So I walk around Manhattan a lot for work. There's always the scaffolding with ladders attached. Every time I walk under one, I cross my fingers. I don't mess around in graveyards. I don't ever visit one unless I'm paying respects to family. It always strikes me as weird when people use them for stuff like photo shoots. It feels disrespectful for some reason, even though there's not really anyone around to disrespect. I don't know how or where these superstitions originated or how exactly they're supposed to work, because I live in America South, and we have a bunch of superstitions from both Europe and Africa. But most people around here paint the roofs over their porches a specific shade of blue to ward off bad spirits. I also turn my shoes in 2 different directions after I take them off by the door. This supposedly confuses hags, haints, and bad juju in general, so it won't find you. I do fully recognize how ridiculous this is. I grew up with stories of Bell Witch. As an adult, I don't believe any of it's real, but it was such a huge part of culture I grew up with in Tennessee. We used to dare each other to call for her 3 times in front of a mirror in a dark room. None of my family or friends ever did it. My mom claimed she did it once and ended up with scratches down her face. To this day, I don't have the balls to do it. I'm getting an eerie feeling just typing this out. I don't really believe in ghosts and can usually think of reasonable explanations for supernatural events on the internet. But as soon as there's a sound in my own home and someone says it's a ghost, all of a sudden all logic is out the window and this ghost is gonna kill me. I was roommates in college with a Navajo guy, and I was far from home, so spent some holidays with his family. They had many stories, but when it came to skinwalkers, They would clam up fast, and they would never talk about them after the sun went down. Maybe they were messing with me, but I'm still terrified of them. I'm not down to drive on backcountry dirt roads at night, the kind with no streetlights and very few homes. I don't believe in the paranormal, but if anything exists, it will be a cryptid. Story about skinwalkers freak me the F out. I don't even want to talk about them, because even doing that can supposedly attract unwanted attention. Jinn. I mean, there's such thing as an ancient magic. It would be where humans came from. The Middle East is one of the oldest pockets of humanity. I am a nurse, and I saw my fair share of dead people. 2, as of yesterday. But I have a keen sense of this person is going to die today. Like sometimes I dreamt of my patient dying, and the day after I learned that they died at the same exact time. I also had strange dreams, such as one time, the one that creeped me out the most. I dreamt that I forgot to buy a birthday present for the girlfriend of my boyfriend's BFF, a girl I met once that I don't follow on any social media. When I told him about my dream, he laughed it off, just to come back 1 hour later with an uneasy look on his face. He showed me her Facebook page. It was indeed her birthday. I had no way to know. It was awkward. These specific dreams creep me out sometimes. Sometimes I feel in my guts that a patient will die, and I rarely get mistaken, like nearly ever. I want to believe that it is from experience, but I'm indeed a young nurse. I'm a 33-year-old woman, but whenever I turn the kitchen light out before bed, I still freak out and run to my room like a child, as if ghost is going to jump out at me in the dark for those last few seconds. Going outside between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m., I'm not superstitious, but anytime I have an odd experience, it's usually in that time range. Provoking, looking for ghosts. Like, I don't believe in them, but I'm also not trying to start some crap. Lights randomly flicker, or glass moves from where I thought I had it last. I ignore it, and I don't ask questions. I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. I absolutely refuse to turn my back to the basement stairs after turning out the light. My Uncle Mikey was always scared when me and the grandchildren went hiking on my grandparents' farm. He'd give us a couple hours until he would come looking for us on the four-wheeler. I think he knew something that we didn't. Now that I'm older, I talk to my cousin Eddie, who said he experienced Sasquatch following him early one morning before a hunt. Some people say we're all dead now, but our consciousness keeps repeating memories of our lives like an endless loop, and it's the reason we experience deja vu sometimes. The uncanny valley, the sense of unease and discomfort you feel when you look at a near realistic animation of a human face, like imperfect deep fakes or flawed CGI faces in movies. It implies that there might be a point in our species' evolution where we had legit reasons to be afraid of something that looked almost human, but wasn't. As Arctic permafrost melts, it will release diseases that have been frozen in the ground for thousands or tens of thousands of years, and life on Earth will have no immunity to them. We don't know whether the universe is in a true vacuum, lowest possible energy state, or a false vacuum, a local low, but not the lowest. If the universe is a false vacuum, at any point, at any moment, a quantum tunneling event could occur, where that point spontaneously decays to a true vacuum. If that happened, a bubble would expand from that point at the speed of light that radically altered physics, instantly annihilating everything down to a subatomic level. Since it travels at sea, there'd be no warning, no way to see it coming. When it reached us, you just instantly blink out of existence. Even if we are in a false vacuum, such an event doesn't become likely for at least 10,139 years, but it could happen at any moment, at any point. If it could have already happened, and the bubble could be heading straight for us, about to end us at any time. The butterfly effect kind of freaks me out because it suggests that every little action could be a part of a series of events that leads to something much more impactful. For example, I could drop a pencil which distracts someone for a few minutes, causing them to miss a bus. And after a few billion seemingly insignificant events, World War III begins. That, after decapitation, you may still be conscious and somewhat aware for at least a few seconds. I recently read that humans have a defense mechanism where we can see something that is non-human but mimicking a human, such as a realistic wax figure, and know that something is off. The theory that was in our evolution, there was a predator that could mimic being human that we had to adapt and develop this defense mechanism for. The rebuttal to this theory was that it comes from us seeing dead bodies through sickness or disease, and not blatant Neanderthal murder or death from an animal. Through our evolution, and learning that something is wrong or out of the ordinary, cause for concern. The Big Bang is just a never-ending cycle. Each time the universe explodes into existence, it will inevitably end. Then the Big Bang restarts. Each iteration of existence is just a rerun of the Big Bang. The theory is likely called the Big Bounce. It's speculated that there are over 2,000 active serial killers in the U.S. alone. It makes you realize that many of the serial killers we know of today, Bundy, BTK, Gacy, are ultimately failed serial killers. It's like that Usual Suspects line. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he did not exist. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!